In 1984, the communities of Southern California were gripped with terror. For over 14 months, an assailant was breaking into homes to steal their belongings. He assaulted the occupants, sometimes brutally torturing them, physically and mentally, before just ruthlessly killing anyone who got in his way. The Nightstalker left the state of California blanketed in fear, and this is his story. Serial Killer File Number 3, we discuss Richard Ramirez, better known as the Nightstalker. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. He was the youngest of 5 children to Julian and Mercedes Ramirez. Julian was a Mexican national and former Mexico police officer who later became a laborer on the Santa Fe Railroad. Julian was prone to fits of anger that resulted in physical abuse to the entire family. Mercedes worked in a boot factory while she was pregnant. She was exposed to chemical fumes leading to his siblings having birth defects. At a very young age, Richie, as his family called him, sustained multiple head injuries. At the age of 2, he had a dresser fall on his head, and at 5, he was knocked unconscious from a swing. This latter incident resulted in Richie to experience epileptic seizures. Richie became prone to emotional outbursts that were very spontaneous and volatile. By the age of 12, Richie began to spend a lot of time with his older cousin, Mike Ramirez. Mike was a decorated U.S. Army Green Beret combat veteran who had a strong influence over the adolescent. He often boasted about his gruesome exploits during the Vietnam War. He shared explicit Polaroid pictures of his victims with Richie, and some of the photos Mike posed with the severed head of a woman he sexually assaulted. Richie had been smoking marijuana since he was 10, so he and Mike used this as a continued bonding mechanism. Mike spent a lot of time teaching him several military skills such as killing with stealth. During this time, Richie spent a lot of time with Mike and sleeping in cemeteries in order to escape his father's violent temper. On May 4th, 1973, 13-year-old Richard had his first brush with death. Mike fatally shot his wife Jessie in the face with a .38 revolver during an argument while Richard was present. After this, Richard became sullen and more withdrawn from his family and peers. Later that year, Richard moved in with his older sister Ruth and husband Roberto. Roberto was a notorious peeping Tom who invited the young and impressionable teen on his nocturnal exploits. Under the influence of Roberto, Richie began experimenting with LSD and Satanism, which he practiced through the rest of his life. In 1977, Cousin Mike was released due to reason of insanity after only serving 4 years of incarceration at the Texas State Mental Hospital. His influence over Richard continued. Richard began to meld his burgeoning sexual fantasies with violence, including forced bondage and sex. When he was in school, Richard took a job at a local Holiday Inn. He used his passkey to rob unsuspecting guests, but his employment was abruptly ended. During one of his exploits, a hotel guest returned to his room to find young Ramirez attempting to sexually assault his wife. The husband naturally beat him senseless until authorities arrived, but the criminal charges would be dropped when the couple, who didn't live in the state, refused to testify. This was not his first brush with authorities, however. By 18, he had become a habitual drug user and was arrested for numerous drug and theft charges. Ramirez was described as tall, lanky, having shaggy black hair, and bad teeth. His continual drug use, lack of hygiene, and addiction to sugar resulted in tooth decay and extreme halitosis. His general poor appearance and sticky fingers resulted in Ramirez being a loner for most of his life. Ramirez was also not successful in school, so he dropped out in the 9th grade. By the age of 22, Ramirez left Texas for California, where he permanently resided, usually settling in the Cecil Hotel. Here, Ramirez would advance from simple theft to burglary and actively indulge in his impulses. Ramirez's first known murder happened on April 10, 1984. He murdered 9-year-old Mei Leung in the basement of a hotel where he was living in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. The girl was beaten, assaulted, then ultimately stabbed to death before he hung her body from a pipe. This killing was not initially identified as being connected to the subsequent crime spree, but in 2009 his DNA was matched to the crime scene. Now, let's discuss the timeline for the Nightstalker murders. On June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Venko was found brutally murdered in her apartment. She was stabbed repeatedly while asleep in bed. Her throat was slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Ramirez had gained access by removing the mesh screening on an open window. This was the birth of the Nightstalker. Ramirez would remain quiet for 8 months before attacking his next victims. On February 21, 1985, he robbed and stabbed sisters Christina and Mary Caldwell, ages 58 and 71. On March 17, 1985, Ramirez attacked 22-year-old Maria Hernandez outside of her condo. He shot her and kicked her out of the way before heading inside of her home. Inside of the home was 34-year-old Dale Okazaki, who he immediately shot and killed. Hernandez would survive the attack, due to the bullet ricocheting off of her keys when she lifted her arms in self-defense. Within an hour of killing Dale, he struck again. He attacked 30-year-old Tsai Lin Yu when he pulled her out of her car. She was shot several times before he fled. She died before the ambulance could even arrive. The two murderers and attempted murder in a single day attracted extensive news coverage, dubbing the home-intruding stranger the Nightstalker. This, however, would not stop Ramirez.
At first, Los Angeles police thought that the murder of a young woman last March was an isolated act of violence, but since then they've come to believe it was connected to a wide-ranging series of assaults by a killer who's become known as the Nightstalker, a killer who apparently struck again during the weekend.
On March 27, 1985, he shot Vincent Zauzera, age 64, and his wife Maxine, age 44. Maxine's body was mutilated with several stab wounds, a T carving on her left breast, and her eyes were gouged out and placed into a jewelry box he'd found. The autopsy determined that all mutilations were post-mortem. At the scene, Ramirez left footprints of his Avia sneakers in the flower beds, which were photographed and cast by police. This was virtually the only evidence police had at the time, other than the bullets found at the scene that matched previous attacks. 2 months after the Zauzeras, he shot Harold Wu, 66, in the head, and his wife, Jean Wu, 63, was punched, bound, and sexually assaulted, but left alive. The next murder occurred May 14, 1985. His victims for the evening were Bill Doy, 66, and his disabled wife Lillian, 56. He shot Bill in the face with a .22 and continued to beat the mortally wounded man into unconsciousness. He then moved to Lillian's room, where she was bound and assaulted. He left the house after ransacking it, and Bill would later die in the hospital. On May 29, 1985, Ramirez attacked Mabel Bell, 83, and her invalid sister, Florence Lang, 81. He beat and bound Lang in her bedroom with a hammer before performing the same action on Bell. Bell would also be electrocuted with an electrical cord. He sexually assaulted Lang, then used lipstick to draw a pentagram on her thigh as well as the walls of both bedrooms. The women were found 2 days later but comatose. Bell later died of her injuries. The following day, he snuck into the home of Carol Kyle, aged 42. He bound her and her 11-year-old son at gunpoint, ransacked the home, and sexually assaulted her before fleeing. On July 2, 1985, he randomly selected the home of Mary Cannon, aged 75. He snuck into the house and bludgeoned the sleeping woman with a lamp, then repeatedly stabbed her to death. His next victim was on July 5, 1985. 16-year-old Whitney Bennett was assaulted with a tire iron. He opted to strangle the girl with a nearby telephone cord, but it began to spark. Richard became scared, believing it was divine intervention, and fled the home. Whitney survived, but required 478 stitches to close the lacerations. On July 7, 1985, he burglarized the home of Joyce Nelson, age 61. She was beat to death with his fist and kicked in the face. He hit her so hard it left an imprint of his Avia sneaker on her face. The same evening, he came upon Sophie Dickman's house. He bound her and attempted to sexually assault her. He stole all of her jewelry and made her swear to Satan before leaving the home. On July 20th, 1985, Ramirez purchased a machete and drove his stolen Toyota to the home of Leila Needing, age 66, and her husband Maxon, age 68. He hacked both of them with the machete, then killed them with shots to the head with his .22 caliber handgun. He further mutilated the bodies before robbing the home and fleeing. The same day, he struck again by breaking into the home of the Covenant family. He shot the husband in the head, killing him instantly, then repeatedly beat his wife. He bound his son and drugged the mother around the house, finding all the valuables. Then he fled the home. On August 6, 1985, he broke into the home of Chris and Virginia Peterson. He shot Virginia in the face, then shot Chris in the neck. Chris fought back, avoiding 2 more shots during the struggle before Ramirez managed to escape. Virginia and Chris Peterson both survived the injuries. On August 8, 1985, he broke into the home of Sakine Abowith, age 27, and her husband Elias, age 31. He instantly killed her husband and followed the usual MO, until their 3-year-old son entered the scene. He tied up the boy while his mother was assaulted. Once he fled with the valuables, she sent the boy to the neighbors for help. On August 18, 1985, Barbara and Peter Pan became his next mark in San Francisco. Peter and Barbara were both killed with a shot to the head. He used lipstick to scrawl a pentagram and the phrase, "Jack the Knife," on the bedroom wall. Detectives discovered the ballistics and imprints from the Pan scene were exact matches for the murders in LA. The information was divulged during a TV press conference. The leak of information infuriated detectives because they knew the killer would be following the case, and Ramirez had been watching the whole time. The very same night, he dropped his 11.5 Avia sneakers over the side of the Golden Gate Bridge. Then a few days later, he returned to LA. August 24, 1985, Ramirez sought out another target, the home of James Romero Jr. This time was different, though, as Romero's 13-year-old son was awake. He heard footsteps outside of the house and went to wake his parents. Ramirez fled the scene as James raced outside, noting the car's color, make, and partial plate number. The information was handed over to the police. After his failed attempt, he broke into the home of Bill Carnes, age 30, and his fiancée Inez Erickson, age 29, through a back door. They both awoke when he cocked his handgun. He shot Bill 3 times in the head before turning his attention to Erickson. He told Erickson he was the Nightstalker and forced her to swear she loved Satan as he beat her with his fist and bound her with neckties. He stole what he could, then pulled her into another room where she was sexually assaulted. He then told her, "Tell them the Nightstalker was here," and fled. Bill survived the attack with surgery, but Erickson was able to give a detailed description of the assailant to police. The car Ramirez had stolen the night he attempted to break into Romero's house was found on August 28th. Police obtained a single fingerprint from the rearview mirror despite Ramirez's careful efforts to wipe the car clean. The print was positively identified as 25-year-old Richard Ramirez. He was described as a drifter from Texas with a long rap sheet that included many arrests for traffic and illegal drug violations. A mugshot was released to the media. The Nightstalker finally had a face. On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, unaware that he had become the lead story in virtually every major newspaper and TV news program across California. He failed to meet his brother, so he returned to LA early on the morning of August 31st. When Ramirez got off the bus, he went to a convenience store. Inside the store, an elderly woman recognized him and began yelling, "The killer." He saw his face on the front pages of the newspaper rack and fled in a panic. He ran across the Santa Ana freeway and attempted to carjack a woman, but was chased by a mob who pursued him for 2 miles. After hopping over several fences and attempting another carjacking, he was eventually subdued by the mob. The mob bashed him over and over with rods until the police arrived. Ramirez raised his hands, begging for protection, identifying himself as the Nightstalker.
Yeah, we will. What have you been arrested for? You ever been arrested before?
Danny, where's your car?
Never been arrested before in L.A.?
My fourth went down.
When? How long ago? Sit up. How long ago?
Let's get all these.
What's your name?
Huh?
What's your name?
11. Back up on the sidewalk, folks, please. Go back. Back up on the sidewalk.
Ramirez's trial didn't begin for 4 years after his initial arrest due to the endless appeals on the part of the defense. But in January 1989, the trial began. At his first court appearance, Ramirez raised a hand with a pentagram drawn on it and yelled, "Hail Satan." His trial attracted several groupies who wrote Ramirez regularly and hung around clad in black robes. On August 14th, the trial was interrupted because one of the jurors didn't arrive at the courtroom. Later that day, she was found shot to death in her apartment. The jury was terrified as they couldn't help wonder whether Ramirez had somehow directed this event. However, it was later determined he had no involvement. On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was convicted of all charges: 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. During the penalty phase of the trial on November 7, 1989, he was sentenced to die in California's gas chamber. He did not beg for his life, rather than made devil horns with his chained left hand and told reporters,
He has one final comment for the media.
Big deal. Death always went with the territories. I'll see you in Disneyland.
He was then sent to his new home on death row at San Quentin Prison. The trial cost more than $1.8 million, making it the most expensive trial in the history of California. Doreen was one of Ramirez's groupies who first wrote him after his arrest in 1985. She was one of many women to send love letters to the Nightstalker, but was not willing to give up, sending 75 letters to the convicted killer. In 1988, her dreams were fulfilled when Ramirez asked her to be his wife, and on October 3, 1996, 36-year-old Ramirez tied the knot with 41-year-old Doreen in a civil ceremony in the San Quentin visiting room. For many years, Doreen vowed to commit suicide when Ramirez was executed. However, she eventually left him. By the time of his death, Ramirez was engaged to a 23-year-old writer. On August 7, 2006, Ramirez's first round of state appeals ended unsuccessfully when the California Supreme Court upheld his convictions and death sentence. His request for a rehearing was denied. Ramirez died of complications of B-cell lymphoma at Marin General Hospital on June 7, 2013. He was 53 years old and he had been on death row for more than 23 years.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
And there you have it, guys. The Nightstalker. So, what are your opinions about this one? Richard Ramirez has always been one of those serial killers that just freaks me out because he was so random. He didn't have a preference. He chose anybody. Whoever was in his way would die. He didn't care. He had no sympathy for life or taking life or anything. It's insane. But I just want to say thank you guys for continuing to hang out with me this week. I enjoy the serial killer files. They're probably my favorite ones to do. So I hope you guys also enjoy them. And if you don't mind, give me a little thumbs up to let me know you're enjoying the content, and subscribe if you're not. It keeps you in the loop with all the uploads. Sorry for this one being a little late, because you guys know Thanksgiving just happened here, so I was a little behind on schedule with family being around. But anyways, thank you guys for always looking out, checking out my videos. I appreciate it. I appreciate your feedback and your interactions. It means a lot. So as always, thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!